honey, what did you do today? My husband asked, and I said, well, I went to a seminar and they talked about benzene and how benzene causes leukemia. And he said, how can that be? Because I used to work with it. It wasn't but 2 months later, he was diagnosed with leukemia. So my experience with him made me wonder, why don't we do more to protect workers? And I thought that I could really make a difference in the lives of the American worker faster, maybe through the law, than I could in my research. So that's why I decided to go to law school and do it through the law.
Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and I'm thrilled to share this conversation with Mary Alexander. Initially a scientist, Mary confronted personal tragedy in her life by moving from public health and the lab to law school and the courtroom, recognizing the value in the court's enforcement mechanisms. Now, Mary is widely recognized as one of the country's top personal injury lawyers. One example, Mary's decade-long work litigating against lead paint manufacturers led to a settlement of over $1 billion and helped change the industry. She's been inducted into the California State Bar's Trial Lawyer Hall of Fame and served as president for the American Association of Justice and the Consumer Attorneys of California. So sit back and enjoy as we delve into Mary's path, the challenges she's faced, the successes she's had, and the wisdom she's learned along the way. Well, Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm going to start where I typically do, which is just kind of getting a little bit into your background and a little bit of, if you don't mind, perhaps where you grew up and your first career, because there was a first career before the law.
Well, I grew up in Iowa. My dad was at the University of Iowa Medical School. So I grew up there all the way through high school, and I went to undergrad there.
Okay.
And when I went to the university, I majored in biology. And when I graduated, I started working in a lab. By then, I had moved to Cincinnati with my husband, and I worked at the medical school at the University of Cincinnati, an environmental health lab with Dr. Eula Bingham, who later went on to be head of OSHA.
Wow.
We were doing toxicology research, testing chemicals for whether they were carcinogenic or not, and also teratogenic, that is, whether they cause any mutations in animals as they're developing. And then moved to California, and I went to Berkeley, the School of Public Health, and getting a master's in public health.
How long were you at the University of California doing that?
It was a one-year program. And after I graduated there, I went to Stanford Research Institute, which was really great because they were starting a program that was a Center for Occupational Safety and Health. And so they were hiring people, and I became one of their directors of one of their departments. And we were doing work for government. We were working on writing documents. They were called criteria documents for the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, who would then send them on to OSHA, and OSHA would promulgate standards on them.
During that time, was your husband also working in the scientific realm?
He was a chemical engineer, and he was, that's why we moved to California. He was working for Clorox in their research department, and which was out in the East Bay.
At a certain point, did you encounter some form of personal challenge, personal tragedy as far as your husband is concerned?
Yes.
And I bring this up because I think it may help us understand a little bit of why you got into the law.
While I was at the School of Public Health, getting my Master's of Public Health in Environmental and Occupational Health, I came home from school one day. It was like in March of the year, and it was like honey, what did you do today? My husband asked. And I said, well, I went to a seminar and they talked about benzene and how benzene causes leukemia. And he said, how can that be? Because I used to work with it when I was in the civil engineering lab. And I remembered that when we were in college at the University of Iowa, he worked his way through college working at a civil engineering firm. And what they did was they would test samples of asphalt, and they needed to see how much debris was in it, rocks and so forth. And so they had to dissolve the asphalt in the asphalt sample, and they used pure benzene. And they would heat the benzene over a Bunsen burner, and there was no hood, no personal protection. So the vapors were really thick. One day I came to pick him up, and it had exploded in a ball of fire surrounding him, and it had singed his arms and his eyebrows. He wasn't really hurt, but he was pretty shook up. Remembering that kind of exposure was amazing. It wasn't but 2 months later, he was diagnosed with leukemia. So when I graduated at the end of that year, that's when I went to Stanford Research Institute. I went to work there, and I worked with the idea of trying to make things better. Was one of our jobs in occupational health for the American worker. And my experience with him made me wonder, why don't we do more to protect workers? And I thought that I could really make a difference in the lives of the American worker faster, maybe through the law, than I could in my research. So that's why I decided to go to law school and do it through the law.
At this time, did you have kids at that point?
Yes. When we moved to California, she was 4. So when I graduated, and when he got sick, she was 5.
What law school did you end up going to?
So I went to Santa Clara Law, and it was the first semester in October that he passed away from his leukemia after a valiant 5-year battle, and he was 31. And when I graduated then, 3 years later, I was looking for a job. I had loans to pay, and by then an 8-year-old daughter. And so I thought that I could sell my biology and my environmental health background. And I got an interview with a law firm up in San Francisco that was it was considered the best firm in San Francisco. And so I was delighted to get the interview. And by the way, I had by then filed a wrongful death suit for my daughter and I for the loss of our husband and father. So that was ongoing. But I went up to interview with them, and they were really great to me. And they had 2 associates that took me around and took me to lunch. And by middle of the afternoon that day, I was interviewing with the senior partner who was head of their toxic department. And he was so impressed with me and my abilities, he patted this pile of paper on his desk and said, "Can you start this afternoon? I've got some interrogatories that need to go out." So I thought, this interview seems to be going well. But then he said they represented an oil company that had a new case that came in. And it was a widow and her 2 children who were suing the oil company because her husband and their father had been exposed to benzene that they had made in a laboratory. And he slammed his desk and he said, where's the evidence? Where's the proof? I was stunned.
At this point, did you open up about what what had happened in your life?
No. I realized that at that moment, I wanted to represent the widow and the children, not the oil company. So I did finish the interview, and I waited for them to give me an offer, and then I turned them down.
What side did you end up working for as you kind of went out the gates then?
Well, I knew that I wanted to be a plaintiff lawyer. I wanted to represent people. I wanted to represent orphans and widows and workers. I wanted to represent the people. I wanted to be the plaintiff lawyer.
What firm did you start at?
My first job was with Sal Liccardo in San Jose. He gave me my first job, and he was doing a general personal injury along with product liability, and even had an asbestos case, and it was great work. I knew it was the right thing to do.
For those, if that Liccardo name sounds familiar, does he have any children who are doing anything interesting these days?
Yes. Sam Liccardo, one of his sons, was mayor, and now he's running for Congress to replace, the seat that Anna Eshoo had. And of course, I'm giving him my support.
Did you have any interactions with Sam when he was younger?
Yeah. Sam used to come to the office when I was there, and he, as a teenager, and he was making copies and things like that around the office.
One thing that we didn't talk about beforehand that I'd be interested in hearing from you, if it's okay, is your experience being a client in a wrongful death case and how that has colored your interactions with your clients in terms of what it's like to be in the thick, in a party. And maybe I can use that as an opportunity for you to kind of launch from there.
Well, it did educate me, and it actually started before I went to law school. But it educated me about what it's like to be a plaintiff, what it's like to be up against a big oil company. And, we were suing Shell Oil because they made the benzene, and then also the distributor. It taught me what it was like to sit down across the table from a lawyer and talk about my case. And I had to answer interrogatories. I had to then sit for a deposition, which was probably the most enlightening to be the witness, to be the plaintiff that's being interrogated by two lawyers. And it was really a difficult experience because on one hand, I thought I shouldn't cry. And on the other hand, I thought I'm going to cry because it was so emotional. And talking about him and talking about my daughter and what our experiences were.
Any learning that you had from that experience of having to go through a deposition yourself that you used or now use in your practice when you're working with clients?
Well, one thing I do is I spend a lot of time with my clients before their deposition. And I go through particularly what it's going to be like to be asked those questions that are tough, and to tell them it's okay to be emotional and it's okay to take a break, and so that they can be as comfortable as possible. But I spend hours and hours with them before a deposition.
Did you end up having to go through the rigors of trial?
No, it did settle. And it was something that, but when I was settling, I was still a brand new lawyer. And there was an annuity that was set up for my daughter, which helped send her through college. And then she went on to medical school.
What kind of practice does she have?
A pediatrician. She had a lot of ear infections when she was a child, and she loved her ear doctor, and she wanted to be a doctor and take care of kids.
Are there cases when you were a younger lawyer that you would like to touch on, or would you like to go down the path of kind of the evolution of your practice and to the point where you are running your own firm?
Well, why don't we talk about some of the early cases, because I think they helped define me too. when I was first practicing with Sal Liccardo, one of the cases he had was a child sex abuse case. And it was a little girl who was in an after-school program, and she was abused by the janitor and the groundskeeper that was there. In those days, you could sue somebody with their homeowner's policy.
Okay.
Now they exclude things like that. But so it was very much a situation where I worked up the case. I went and talked with her therapist and had the therapist deposition and her deposition, the little girls. And when it came time to, by the way, the abuse was really extensive. But when it came time to do the minors' compromise, when we settled the case, it turned out it was a woman judge in Santa Clara County. She was very sensitive to the child, brought us into her chambers to do the compromise. And so this is during my first year as a lawyer. And the judge, she looked at me and she said, "You did a really good job on this case." First time, I mean, other than maybe my boss, for somebody to say I did a good job on a case. And then she said she had been abused.
Oh, wow.
When she was a little girl, which I think probably accounted for some of her sensitivity for the child. But here it is, almost 40 years later, and I'm still doing those cases, child sex abuse cases, and even more than I did early on. So that was, I think, really a defining case for me. And then I also did some medical malpractice, which was before MICRA. It was up on appeal. We could still do it was easier to do medical malpractice cases, and as well as auto cases. But one of the medical malpractice cases was somebody who had a child that wasn't delivered soon enough, and the child was very profoundly brain injured. So that actually was also something that was very much a defining case for me.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here with Cooper's Code, please help us extend our reach by giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and consider sharing an episode with a friend. Additionally, we want to know who you want to hear on the show. Have an interview suggestion? Email us at podcast@coopers.law. Going back to the child sex abuse cases, you say you still do a lot of those. Are there any recommendations you have for people who, say, get one if they haven't handled one before, in terms of the types of things that somebody should be looking for in cases like this? They sound like they're probably unique in certain elements in terms of the proof and the evidence and the damages. The
child sex abuse cases are unique. And I think some of it is that people may be reluctant to take them because what do we do to prove it? It's a little more clear in an auto case. But I would encourage anyone to do the cases because it's really very satisfying to help these people. People who are now adults, when they've suffered a lifetime from it. Sometimes people don't even realize the problems they've had in their life really are arising from that abuse. Their lack of trust of people, difficulty on the job because they can't trust people and their boss and those kinds of things. And so it is very satisfying to help people who are finally able to talk about it and come forward after many years. You need to be able to help them through it. The emotions are very strong. And to develop the information, sometimes it's hard because if it's been many years, there have been witnesses who have disappeared, documents have disappeared. But it's worth the effort and the time to put into it, to dig in and to prove the case and to help them.
A parallel question, because I am guessing a lot of our listeners have children themselves. Are there any patterns that you noticed in terms of the way these types of cases evolve, things that somebody should be looking for if they have a child?
You mean to prevent?
Exactly.
Yes. What predators do is they groom. They groom the child. And sometimes they groom the parents too. Very often they do. That means to make friends with the child, develop the child's trust, make friends with the parents, and develop the trust of the parents. And so I think it's important to not look at the position they're in, because it might be a teacher, it might be somebody in the church, it might be the next door neighbor. So it's more the behavior of the person. And the grooming comes in the form of spending a lot of time with the child, taking them to go get ice cream or go to McDonald's, go to the park. And so they maybe start babysitting, which is very helpful for the parents if they're working a lot. And so you need to look for that kind of behavior, and also to talk to the child about how to resist, they call it reporting and resisting and reporting. And because the children are confused because you're supposed to do whatever an adult tells you to do. And they think, well, is this right? Is this wrong? And they think that they might get in trouble if they report. And there's actually some books that are out that can help parents in sitting down and talking with their children so that everybody's on the alert, both the child and the parents.
Any books that come to mind that you would recommend as far as that's concerned?
Well, it's interesting that actually the Boy Scouts came out with some pretty good books. The problem was they didn't really use them, and also they have, I think, some videos that are very good.
And to the extent there's anything that we come across, we'll include those in the show notes. I say interesting because I think for a lot of people, whether it's the Boy Scouts or the Roman Catholic Church, these are areas where people have had significant issues in terms of patterns of sexual abuse. Did you get involved in those larger organizational cases as well?
Yes, I have a lot of the clergy cases. In California, we just had a 3-year window, and so a lot of people came forward who were abused as children by priests or other people in the church. And of course, the sad part of those cases is the cover-up that the church did and the lack of accountability, and that includes going into bankruptcy. And most of all the dioceses in California probably will eventually go into bankruptcy. Some are already in San Francisco and Oakland and Santa Rosa. LA hasn't yet, but San Diego and others. So have, not only is it important in these cases, like against the Catholic Church, for the plaintiffs to receive compensation that will help them in their lives and help them get the therapy and the things they need. But it's accountability. It's the justice. It's somebody listening to them and saying, yes, we understand what you've been through and what was done to you and how hard it's been that people didn't, if they tried to report it, didn't believe them. And how hard it's been that the church has tried to cover it up and move priests from parish to parish. I had one case that was actually a girl who was abused, and they knew that the priest had spent time in jail for abusing children. And then when he got out of jail, they put him back into parishes.
Wow.
And gave him access to children. So it's that kind of cover up and lack of taking care of children and betraying the trust. It's really very satisfying to help those people.
For somebody on the outside of an organization like that, and maybe for you as well, have you figured out why, because your story about putting somebody back into a position of power is not atypical. Do you have any sense as to why organizations do something like that?
Well, one reason that I've come to understand, I'm not Catholic, but they needed priests to do the Eucharist, to do the Mass. And if you don't have them, then you can't be a church, you can't have people come to church. You have to have somebody who is a priest to do that. And I think that was some of it. Some they didn't really want to admit it. They tell us that they were told by experts that they could be reformed, and they would send them off for therapy and then bring them back. It's not true. They can't. People who are that kind of predator really can't be changed. And so, but I think one of the main reasons was that they really needed these priests, and they didn't want to. They didn't want to lose them, and so they would just move them from parish to parish, and they covered it up.
Continuing kind of the same Catholic Church track, the bankruptcy side of things is interesting, and here's why I bring this up. I think a lot of us have had a bankruptcy show up in a case, and there's a bankruptcy stay, and there's an annoyance or perhaps a complete obstacle to some form of compensation. As I understand certain elements of the church, the diocese own certain things. So when they go through a bankruptcy, they still have assets. Are the people that you're representing still getting compensated in any fashion, or are the bankruptcies completely doing away with compensation when they go through that process?
What happens in bankruptcy in general is that, first of all, compensation is delayed for years as things wind their way through the bankruptcy. But also, people, just in general, for any kind of bankruptcy where there's personal injury, whether it's product or it's the Catholic Church, they are paid nickels on a dollar, that they're not getting their full compensation. We believe as plaintiff lawyers that the Catholic Church has plenty of money and plenty of assets. They just don't want to give it up. And they use the bankruptcy to do that. They'll tell us they don't have the money, but that's part of what we have to fight in bankruptcy is tell us what your assets are, where are the properties, what are their values. They like to say the parishes are separate, so the property might be owned by them and not the national. So it is a huge battle to find out how much they actually have in assets. And then the other thing that happens, though, is that the insurance companies have changed. They don't want to pay out. If some of them just flat out say, we're not paying. This is a crime. We don't cover crimes, and so we're not going to pay. So that's made it much more difficult as well to compensate these people.
As we talk about the diocese and bankruptcy, obviously the Global Roman Catholic Church is a enormous organization, been going for 2,000 plus years. How do they justify what sounds like a corporate shell game in terms of saying, well, okay, that's the diocese, it's not us, And corollary question, I presume once the bankruptcy is done and the diocese says we have no money, that there's just no more church in, say, San Francisco.
I think that the strategy is that they don't have enough money, but there's so many cases that they can't afford it. They don't have the money. And the only way to do it is through the bankruptcy, and to have the court, that is the bankruptcy judge, to oversee it, and the insurance companies get involved too. We have had mediation sessions with them that have gone nowhere. So eventually, obviously, there has to be a bankruptcy plan, and then things are, whatever monies there are paid out to people. But the problem is there's never, in the bankruptcy system and the way it works, there's never enough money to really compensate these people. Mm. And And it deprives them, by the way, of trial by jury. These people are never going to get their day in court. They're never going to sit before a jury of their peers and tell their story and have a jury decide what their compensation is. And to have that adjudication before a jury and a judge about what their case is and what its value is, it's taken away by the system of having everything go into bankruptcy.
How do the damages get allocated or assessed if there's no jury trial?
Well, one way that it happens is that there can be a overall settlement of a lump sum of money that will then be divided up. Usually, it's by a trustee that would decide what each case gets. And all these cases in bankruptcy, there's usually some claim form that is submitted, what the damages are, what they've been through, how it's affected their life, if they've had medical care or therapy, what are the bills, what is the wage loss, those kinds of things that a trustee would look at and divide out the money.
And I presume that the trustee, in certain respects, it sounds almost like a binding arbitration where the trustee makes a finding, and is it appealable or is it done?
Well, sometimes, for example, the way the Boy Scouts are in bankruptcy, and right now that money is being divided up. There was in that case, the plan included already kind of a matrix of the kinds of abuse, the level of abuse, and how much those categories would be paid. And so the trustee now is going through and paying out those claims. The problem is that the trustee is considering whether there was a statute of limitations in the states. So somebody in California who happened to have an open statute at the time was going to get paid more money than somebody who was in a state that didn't. So those kinds of really inequities that come into play in the bankruptcy system. But to answer your question, in Boy Scouts, there is a way to appeal it, but it's only like one appeal and to the trustee. And if the trustee doesn't accept it, then that's final. That's it. There's no way to appeal it.
No one really wants to become a bankruptcy expert. That's not why we do personal injury work. It sounds like some of the cases that you have, because you also have done some talc work too, correct? Maybe you can help us understand on the talc side how Johnson & Johnson has gone through multiple bankruptcies and seems to still be in business, and talc claimants seem to be getting the short end of the stick.
Well, it is a good example. And no, we didn't plan to be bankruptcy lawyers. And when PG&E went into bankruptcy with the fire cases, many of us were sitting in the courtroom on what's called a day one, and we're Googling on our phone what the words mean on bankruptcy legalese. I've now told my granddaughter, who's starting law school, that she should take a bankruptcy course if she wants to be a personal injury lawyer. I wish I had had one.
I'm going to tangent off of my own question, which is, do you use bankruptcy counsel? Have you educated yourself? Have you done a combination of the two? Because it sounds like a lot of the case work that you're doing has some element to this.
Well, it has happened far too often, too much bankruptcy. And I have had to learn it, more bankruptcy law than I ever wanted to. But the plaintiffs, that is, we're called the creditors, our clients are creditors, hire their own bankruptcy lawyers. So there's a firm that we would select to represent us. And then you also have to have financial firms that somebody to figure out what the assets are. I mean, that's real estate lawyers too. So we have to have experts to help the bankruptcy firm. It's all very, very complicated. So, like I said, I've had to learn more bankruptcy law than I ever wanted to. And in the Talc cases, it's been going on for years. I think we're getting close to 10 years. So what does that mean for women who have had ovarian cancer? They're dying while they are in bankruptcy. Women are dying, or perhaps if they're not, that means that they somehow went into remission. But they've gone without compensation. And so their cases, the cases are turning into wrongful death cases. While Johnson & Johnson, who has plenty of money, is playing a bankruptcy game and moves assets around in shell corporations and has them go into bankruptcy. They're now trying for the third time to go into bankruptcy, even though the last time the judge basically threw them out of bankruptcy court because they had way too much money and they were misusing the system. So it's almost like the more people you injure, the more children who are abused, the more women who have cancer, or the more houses you burn down, the more likely you are to be able to hide in bankruptcy court.
I think there's a parallel sort of joke. If you owe the bank $800,000, the bank owns you. If you owe the bank $8 billion, you own the bank. It sounds like a variant of that.
It is a variant of too big to fail. And that the bankruptcy really is being used in a manner that takes away the rights of the people for trial by jury, takes away their right to full and fair compensation, and puts them through more trauma. They're re-traumatized by having to go through this system.
Thank you for listening, and please join us next week as we continue this conversation. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions for who we should have on the show. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.